Well, so think again AI, cognitive atrophy, and what makes us irreplaceable. There's a lot of headline there. So, this seminar, mostly faculty, a single grad student. So, not really, the challenge of making this is who was going to come exactly. It could be a power user to somebody who's just surface level into AI to someone who has never really looked into it. One of the things to note is that a lot of this information is likely going to be familiar to you, but it's not also too dense. My goal is that with one thing, there will be one thing you get out of this that will really keep you thinking. Now, the disclaimer: I have no financial disclosures, not part of any AI company. Um, Disclosure of humanity: I am a human. In 10 years' time, that might be a requirement of these presentations. I did use these AI applications. A lot of these are likely familiar to you: Claude, GPT, Gemini, and Grok. Now, a lot of the things we're going to talk about does not have longitudinal data, not available at the moment. Rather than a deep dive, we're going to look at an intermingling of ideas based on my one claim. So I consider myself more of a AI practitioner, technophile, technologist. I love studying tech, and I've used it throughout my career, which has kind of spanned a couple of different areas. Okay, so I put this on the screen, less of my resume, but more to give you an idea of how I approach questions. Okay, I went to the University of Illinois. I studied political science, Middle Eastern studies, and Arabic. I finished my master's degree there, and I spent time in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. I was at the New America think tank studying drone strikes. I also helped basically code information for a supercomputer on political violent events. And this is back in 2013, so before a lot of this stuff was happening. After school, I went into business, specifically strategic communications, marketing, and general business consulting. I got into entrepreneurship. My wife and I started a small company, and I also studied the markets and investing. Now, both of us decided to go into medicine. So I went back to the University of Virginia to get all my prerequisites, which was another journey in and of itself, and got my training at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I didn't specialize in oral surgery, but that's a lot of what I did at the hospital was oral surgery. And lastly, now I'm here at Access Dental in Raleigh. So the reason why I go through all of these things is because I study a lot of questions in the intersect of different domains. So, from an individual perspective, I'm thinking about humanity in both of the material, the physiology, the biology, and the immaterial, the psychology and the philosophy. I'm looking at systems, power, society, and culture. With my background in political science, Middle Eastern studies, I'm also thinking how are things going to affect us as a whole? And then lastly, because of my background in business, I'm always thinking about incentives of people, of organizations, of value. So that's why I bring all these things, because these are all different domains that we're going to touch on in this talk today. Now, I recently finished up a project called the Gen Creative that just finished up this past year. And I explore a lot of these topics in my podcast, Notes and Things, which is basically, I say conversations worth pausing for. So I talk about humanoid robots, quantum computing, AI, creativity, and the future of work. So from my lived experience to asking questions, exploration of AI through creativity. So what do I mean by that? So when I worked in marketing, I worked with a lot of graphic designers, animators, videographers, wrote different scripts. I think creativity is obviously super fun, right? And if you look at the AI systems of 3 years ago and you say, make me a cat in a pencil sketch with a white background, it would take minutes. Today, it is seconds. And not only is it one image, it's multiple images. So I saw, well, I guess to take a step back, when I interacted with these creatives, I saw the amount of manpower that it took to produce really, really good creative work. Okay. When I looked at AI, I go, holy smokes, this is coming for their jobs. That was the first thing that I thought of. Because looking at incentives, looking at value, a company is going to go to the cheapest, fastest thing so long as it can produce good work. So, and when I talk to professional creatives about this, many of whom are family members, and I say, "Hey, do you see what's happening with these creative tools?" And they go, "It's never going to look like a human did it." And I go, I don't think you understand how quickly these things evolve and they iterate. So when I did the Gen Creative, a big point of it was to say, hey, look at what's happening in the tech space. Look at how this might come after your job. I want you to pay attention. And it's also super cool, right? I can put in a text, natural language text. I get a really neat image. I could, within seconds, make that image a video that is production level quality. That would take thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to obtain in the real world. So, but what did it lead to? Dilution of thought. I say 10,000 cat videos. What I started seeing over and over again when I evaluated all these articles with my team was that the images were amazing, but the thought behind it, the quality, the story, the narrative was starting to really be watered down. And it wasn't just happening for creatives. I can feel it in myself. I would be on, I call ChatGPT Chad just to, humanize it a little bit because it makes it fun. So I'd be talking to Chad and he'd say how great I am, how great of an idea this is. I'd be like, oh wow, you keep going down that thought process. And I could feel myself not thinking as deeply, not feeling those synapses burn. It it's funny because when I learned Arabic, it's a very challenging language. And I studied in Syria and it was a language only program. And I remember sitting there and I was grinding and just trying to get it together. And you can feel the brain working and expending energy when you're trying to speak with someone in a language that you're unfamiliar with. And it was the same experience when I went to UVA and I studied biology after 10 years being in school. That same amount of, you could say, anguish, physiologic anguish of learning was not present when we're using these AI things. So I thought, let's see, the next thing. What if the most important question about AI isn't what it can do, but what it is doing to us as we integrate it into our daily life? So my claim in this talk today is going to be AI programs are systematically removing the friction that makes cognitive effort necessary. If analogy to physical atrophy holds, this will produce measurable cognitive decline at a population scale within a generation. So, of course, longitudinal data does not exist. So let's see what I mean by this. What does that flow look like? Now, human unassisted creative flow, we have ideation, we have that iteration, that grinding, putting your head down, taking a walk, thinking about it more, to finally come upon a product, and we have measurable cognitive growth. Now, AI offloaded, AI assisted, we prompt, minimal effort to put the prompt in, and it generates something that's usually quite extraordinary when you think that it only took a couple seconds. We get a product that is very near, say 80% to what humans make without that cognitive load. The cognitive load is minimal. So we're either maintaining what we have or we're starting to lose it. We're starting to lose it. I would argue there are two human factors that really stand out to me as to why AI is effective at displacing our cognitive effort. The first is passive effort is rewarded over active effort. So we, by design, want to avoid unnecessary efforts, partly evolutionary, partly character driven, partly environmental, but we develop avoidance behaviors. And we, of course, like the dopamine hits, the reward, the anticipation and novelty, exactly what AI aligns with. And I'd say secondly, almost paradoxically, cultural obsession with efficiency. The faster we can produce, the higher value we have. And it's almost as if, particularly in a professional environment, not using AI is almost irresponsible. So now we're having this displacement of cognitive effort. Passive effort wins. Where is time actually going? These are all probably statistics that we've heard about, but I always think they're worth mentioning because frankly, they're shocking, right? The average American US adult is spending 3 hours and 45 minutes watching TV or streaming. They're spending almost 2.5 hours on social media, and they're spending another 2.5 hours on their smartphone. Now, if you look at how people are doing it, likely they're scrolling while they're watching TV, they're on their phone, on social media. So there is a little bit of overlap. But on average, people actually underestimate how much time they spend on these applications than overestimating or being accurate. The passive effort wins. The efficiency obsession. So we all know the personal development books. We see them. I've read a lot of them, and I do enjoy the ideas of efficiency and personal development, but we are quite obsessed with it. And therefore, we are going to choose something that's going to help us be more productive, more efficient. So here, just a couple, statistics here. Large industry growing 20% year over year, this idea of productivity. Busyness becoming a status symbol. This is a lovely study basically talking about how celebrities, when they're tweeting or putting up social media posts, talking about how much they're hustling, how hard they're working, they're signaling how productivity is the superior thing. And of course, here in the US, we don't take a lot of time off. And to a degree, that's rewarded. We're one of the only economically developed countries to not have required paid time off, right? An obsession with efficiency. So if we aim for efficiency only, we may lose out. Cognitive challenge is necessary. It's very, very necessary for us. So we see this in loads and loads and loads of research. Okay, first, Robert Bjork talking about slow, deliberate work leads to long-term retention. The core finding is that learning from tasks improves observable performance, or removing challenge rather, improves observable performance, but degrades learning. So it might be able to show that we're learning something, right? But are we actually taking it in? And I know you all have seen this with students' papers and presentations. It might look really pretty, but when you probe slightly, you realize it's very surface level, right? Neuroplasticity. If you don't use it, you lose it. And we see that in the body all of the time, right? I see that potentially, in practice. If a person loses a tooth, they start losing their bone because the body's not going to be sending resources to an area that is not being used. And then, of course, the famous London taxi driver study really looked into how us using GPS and navigation actually hurts our hippocampal. If we get hippocampal atrophy by using GPS and assisted devices. And for the London taxi drivers, they have much larger volume because they have to memorize every single street in London. It's actually a really incredible test that they have to do. So, but this is not a new phenomenon. There's a lot of historical precedents and features of AI adoption and their broad effects. We'll be able to see how all of this leads into what we've seen in the past. So, physical atrophy. When mechanized labor was introduced, we saw a measurable decline in population level grip strength. And you go, grip strength? Like, do I really, really need that? Well, what's interesting about grip strength is that it was actually connected to cognitive decline a decade later. So what it really is, it's like correlation versus causation. It's like, does grip strength really bring cognitive decline? Well, maybe no, but maybe what grip strength is representative of the rest of our body. We also talk about convenience. We go towards things that are convenience. We think of ultra processed food when it was introduced. Easy, just throw in the micro, pick it up from fast food where we have all the nutrients we need. But we know that that's led to a lot of the systemic diseases that we see today. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, often because of lifestyle factors and from eating poorly, particularly processed foods. Now, the biggest thing, and the reason why I circle it, is lag in response. Facebook was launched in 2004. And it was only until last year that countries are starting to put in regulations for children and teens to not be on social media because they see how basically harmful it is for relationships, for mental health. And we see that in Jonathan Haidt's work in Anxious Generation. But we're talking 20 years. Do we really have to worry about it right now? Right? The central concern is the speed of adoption. When we look at GPT being adopted, it was 24 times faster meeting 100 million users than Instagram, 24 times faster. There were 1 million users in 5 days. This is unheard of in any consumer technology. So the reason why I'm bringing it up is because this is a fast-growing issue. It's a fast-growing issue. Researchers are starting to worry. Response is ongoing. Stanford and OpenAI are coming together to really study how GPT is affecting students K through 12. But what's really interesting when you look at this quote, few have been evaluated in a meaningful way. Education leaders are being asked to make consequential decisions in a data vacuum. These technologies are being deployed at scale before understanding of the cognitive consequences. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that we pull the plug and we pump the brakes on it. But what I think I'm advocating for is that we have to be extremely thoughtful how we integrate these tools into the classroom, into the university, into the workplace. MIT Media Lab did a study showing, supporting this idea of cognitive atrophy. And what they studied were three different groups. One was search assisted research, one was LLM or GPT assisted research, and the other was just using your brain. No computer research. What they found is that the group, somewhat unsurprising, that used a GPT had much less brain activity than those who used search. And then again, the search, less brain activity than those that used more traditional means. So the key takeaway, the LLM group performed worse than the brain-only group across neural, linguistic, and scoring levels. So the fair skeptic. I was recently at a lunch with a group of S&T grad students, and one of them said, "It spits out garbage. I haven't used it in months." And I said, "Well, do you realize how much it's iterating, how much better it's becoming?" So we see marked improvements. We have a 96% drop in hallucinations. So for those who may not know what I mean by hallucinations, it's basically when a LLM spits out an answer that sounds very real, but it isn't. It's totally made up. So you're talking, they will make up titles of papers, they'll make up authors, they'll make up facts. Now we have a dramatic reduction in hallucinations, but here's the important nuance. Open-ended factual recall and complex reasoning still remain high, 33 to 51%. So you're thinking of complex medical questions, maybe legal findings, putting cases together. Not something that they can just pull out of training, but something that it really has to, quote, think about, right? But I think the key takeaway from this whole slide is we need to envision what the future is going to be. We have to qualify the present, understanding that these hallucinations still occur, and we simply need to pay attention to what's happening. We can't just push it off and not think about it. But again, I'm going to go back to that distribution curve. What does the general population know about hallucinations? Unfortunately, not much. Okay. 99% of Americans have used these AI products. 64% don't know they're actually using AI. Right. So this is AI that is integrated in a lot of different systems. So you think that Google, I would say recently, but not that recently, changed the search function where now they have Gemini responses as opposed to their general search function. That would be an example of AI being integrated into what we're using. Another shocking number here, 47% of enterprise AI users made a major business decision based on hallucinated content. So you imagine, the person in New York, Chicago, St. Louis, who's got a deadline coming up, and they're throwing this in, and it sounds really good, and they go, "Yeah, let's just go with it." I don't know. I'm sure they're starting to, but corporate offices going through AI training so that people pump the brakes and see if this is hallucinating or not. But this is what I'm worried about. I'm worried about that normal distribution. The majority of the population who are not going to think about it because of all those reasons that I said before, our obsession with efficiency and our desire for passive activity. So the honest and exciting complication of this argument of kind of being somewhat against AI, we're going to talk about AlphaGo, Move 37, and how AI is opening new frontiers of thought. Is everybody here familiar with AlphaGo? Okay, everybody knows about AlphaGo. I love this story, so we're going to go through it anyways, right? So we have Gary Kasparov being beaten by IBM's Deep Blue in chess. But people thought there's no way that a computer will ever beat a human being in Go. So if you're familiar with this, Go has an extraordinarily larger amount of moves than chess. Basically impossible to do brute force reasoning in the computer in order to figure out what the next move is. But in that game with Lee Sedol, the world's best Go player, Move 37 happened. They basically took this expert player and put him on his feet, literally. He walks out of the room after seeing that move that the computer made and is trying to rack his brain. Why the heck did that computer make that move? It made no sense. The stats showed that that move would be made by a human 1 in 10,000 times. So for Lee Sedol, he said, I thought AlphaGo was based on probability and calculation, that it was merely a machine. But when I saw this move, I changed my mind. Surely AlphaGo is creative. So it was a really, I mean, I highly recommend anyone checking out the documentary on Google or on YouTube if you haven't already seen it. But the commentators couldn't believe this move that would be made. Because for a human, it would have lost them the game immediately. It would have made no sense. But what ended up happening is that move that a human would have never thought of won the game. So, but it's not just AlphaGo anymore. Shout out to Google DeepMind. They had AlphaFold, AlphaProof, AlphaTensor. These are all computer programs that are making novel discoveries and solving for problems that no human had ever thought. For NASA's antenna, they use evolutionary algorithms to find a new way of producing an antenna that works very effectively. I love the story of Airbus and Autodesk teamed up together. They gave the program parameters and said, make a aircraft partition for us in any way that you can and make it just better than what we have. And what it came up with was a design that was 45% lighter than any human designed equivalent. It arrived at exploring forms and not engineering them. And the engineer said, we would never have thought about this. And what's interesting about it is if you look at the image, it looks very biologic. When AI solves problems, it doesn't think like an engineer or a scientist or a mathematician. It explores the landscape of possibility itself, which is actually really interesting because when we think of going down a train of thought, we go, no, that's silly. I'm not going to think about that. That's move 37. I'm never going to think about that. That would never work. But they just go there anyway because they can, right? They have nobody criticizing them. They have no emotions invested into it. And maybe that's the point, that it's going to just keep going until it finds the best solution. So the AI goes beyond the human frameworks. For us, it's very stepwise, looking at that logic train to an answer. For AI, it's a chain of thought. It's going back and forth. It's allowing itself to think in all different directions until it gets to an answer. So I recently interviewed Scott Aronson, who is a pioneer of quantum computing. And one of the things he said that's really stuck out to me, we don't know if any human intellectual work that ultimately requires us, that AI cannot do. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Maybe there is stuff that AI can never replicate. As far as we know, this is the creation of a new intelligence on Earth. That is both a very exciting and very scary thought. But I think that there is a bit of having humility of saying, what is it? What is it that we're creating? What is it that we're doing? What value do we bring in a world of AI? Stuff that AI may never replicate. But what's interesting is that which pushed us towards AI may be the very thing that makes us irreplaceable. The tree through the window. So I record these podcasts in my basement and I have a small window and I was sitting there and I was looking out that window, just trying to doing some work, and I looked out the window, thought about something entirely different. And I go, that's interesting. I don't think a computer would do that. They wouldn't be in the middle of a thought process and then get distracted by a bird out a window and then come with a new thought that's entirely different and has nothing to do with what they're working on. It's random ideation, somewhat irrational, pretty inefficient, and pretty unproductive. So this is where it comes to letting the mind wander. The default mode network. Basically, when we're not engaged in something, not engaged in a goal-oriented task, letting our mind rest, wander, unfocused states is when we can have the greatest creative insight. Stepping away can lead to breakthroughs, right? And this comes with the Kaplan's work on attention restoration theory, going out into nature, allowing ourselves just to rest the mind. It's not that we want to be anti-AI, but we want to be careful on what we're optimizing for. letting ourselves wander, going against the efficiency grain might be the thing that makes us unique, makes us valuable. When we use AI, it fills the gaps. Our default mode network never needs to fire because we never need to take a rest from all the work that we're doing. Our cognitive capacity weakens, and then it's a reinforcing loop, and we want to keep going back to it. The moments feel inefficient, and that's why we're eliminating them. But they might be the most expensive mistake that we make. So here's the core tension. We have instrumental logic, but then we have this associative wandering, what we as humans kind of do very randomly as we're resting and recouping. So what we have to start integrating, I think, is planned for intentional wandering. We had the sedentary lifestyle and processed food leading to chronic disease. And now we put intentional diet and exercise into our week. Oh, I have to stand up. We get the notification on our smartwatch, right? I think it's going to be the same with AI integration. We're going to come to this idea, okay, we're having cognitive atrophy. It's likely going to lead to some type of degenerative disease. And we're going to realize that we have to put in place during our week and our day intentional cognitive exercises. So it isn't one or the other. AI is here to stay, and it is helpful, but we have to have thoughtful integration, right? We have to think, observe, learn, and reflect. But throughout then, we might be putting in prompts. We might be allowing the AI and the GPT to help us. We need to allow ourselves to think again, but with AI. It isn't one or the other. And I put the notebook and pencil here as a point of actually using analog things, using literally paper and a pencil, busting out those colored crayons. That's okay too. Using a whiteboard, whatever it is. The point is having some type of material thing, taking us off the screen, off the electronics. So how is all of this playing outside the world of ideas? Professional life as we know it will change. So Shopify, this is a wonderful memo. Well, not necessarily wonderful in content, but wonderful in terms of insightful and interesting, that was released publicly. And well, it was released secretly, and then he came out publicly, the CEO of Shopify, and basically said that the new organizational chart was going to have AI agents within the organization itself. And they said that those who utilize AI will be promoted or hired before those who don't. So that was one of the first public displays of very outright CEO saying this is what we're going towards. Block recently cut 40% of its workforce. Out of 10,000, they fired 4,000 people because of AI integration and the efficiencies that company was making. Anthropic, which I'm very grateful for, I'm a big Claude fan, they say straight up, we're going to take your job. We're going to take jobs. And people need to prepare for it. The CEO is very, very forward in saying, this is something that we as a nation and as a world need to realize that AI will take jobs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that those people who lose their jobs will not have a job, but there will likely be a transition. It's the same thing as, the guy or gal who used to be on stilts and light the lamps on the street. We got electricity, they no longer had a job. But hopefully those, people, they may be phased out, but they will be able to acquire a new one. But I do think that the job disruption is going to be a lot faster than we anticipate. It's not going to be as slow of a transition, but it's something we should be aware of. So AI isn't just entering the workplace, it's entering the spaces we assumed were most human. So 3 domains to watch out for: therapy and relational AI. Shout out to Daniel's work, right? A lot of these companies are starting to provide emotional support with AI and developing relationship with them. And there's absolutely no regulation. Humanoid robots. I recently had a conversation with an investor of humanoid robots. We had a great discussion about how they're pretty far off for our homes, but they are being put into controlled environments like factory floors. So it might not be the 5-finger humanoid like C3PO, which companies like Figure are coming out with, or Tesla's Optimus is, again, the humanoid that we know of as like the C3PO, but they may have other, appendages or functions that make sense for the factory, but they are coming. And if you think of the percentage of jobs that have happened at the factory floor, that's somewhat scary, right? So Goldman Sachs says projected that there will be 2 to 3 million humanoid units deployed by 2030. And then vibe coding. I'm sure you have all heard of vibe coding. So I won't obviously dive deep into it, but I think it's very, very much worth noting that people who have very little CS training and engineering training will be able to make solid apps with just natural language. And if you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it because it will open your eyes. And one can say, well, they don't have the back end. There are a bunch of security issues. They don't have the foundations. You still need to know how to hook up the database and all of these things. Every month, there is a new feature. There's a new update that allows for this to be easier and easier and easier. And if you just reflect back on what vibe coding was 12 months ago into what it is today, it's pretty shocking. So fast forward in 2 to 3, 5, 10 years, grandma or grandpa down the street will be able to make their own app and put it in the app store. There's a lot of interesting things to talk about with that, but I'll leave it at that. So what changes? The question isn't whether domain expertise matters, it's what kind of expertise still does. Recall is no longer going to be the asset because we can just use an LLM, ask them a question, boom, they give us the answer. Synthesis of all of these different areas is what's going to, I think, set folks apart. So AI optimizes within its known parameters. Humans navigate what hasn't happened yet. So AI is being trained on all of this information that's already been produced. It's also being trained on all the information it's producing itself. So we think of all the slop that's out there. But we as human beings, we live in a world before the AI is actually gathering the data and information, at least right now. So understanding how to critically think about how our environment or our relationships or communities or society is changing and how it applies to whatever it is that we're studying or working on is extremely important, because that's what sets us apart from the machines in this case. So that's why I talk about that implementation: human, social, cultural, environmental. That's what AI cannot model. So critical thinking was never just logic. It's judgment, ethics, context, and those are not computable. So how do we prepare for this? For professionals, it's going to be reframing expertise. You're in the world of AI now. You 100% absolutely have to understand how AI is going to change your industry. Because the fact that all the experts can agree on is that AI for sure is going to change every single industry. But what they don't know is how. They don't know how it's going to change. Use AI as a collaborator, not as a replacement for judgment. Stay cognitively active, outsource tasks, not thinking. So putting in those, what things throughout the week can you help to give your brain a rest or to think differently? And then know your field's irreducible human factors cold. What is the human factor in the industry that I'm in? Remember to wander and to think again, right? And for students, of course, learning how to think, not just what to know. So they're always going to look for the way out, right? The students are always going to look for a way out. So how can you, in the classroom, in the lecture hall, in the exam, push them in a way that helps them think outside of the computer, outside of the LLM, or using it in tandem? How can they do it together? Build tolerance for ambiguity. AI needs clean problems. The world doesn't offer them. So this is the idea of garbage in and garbage out. They have to have really good prompts. They can only have really good prompts if they know what they're trying to ask. They can only know what they're trying to ask if they actually know what they're trying to study, right? Or the answer they're trying to get. So this is the synthesis across domains. And yes, for students as well, they need to wander, need to think again. So AI was trained on what the world was. We have to prepare for what it will be. And it's going to be a crazy world. So let's bring it all together here. We started with one question: what is AI doing to us? We found cognitive friction being removed, a cultural obsession with efficiency and accelerating it, a historical precedent suggesting that harm will be invisible until it isn't. We found that honest complication, that AI is also genuinely expanding what's possible. Move 37 wasn't a threat, it was just a new frontier of thinking. So now it's moving into our relationship, our physical world, and our creative process. So it really wasn't always about AI, it was about us. How do we maintain our unique value as humans in an AI world? So perhaps it comes back to the questions that have been asked for millennia, right? These are the tough questions of who you are when you're not being productive. What do you value when value cannot be calculated? What is truly beautiful? What is good and what is true? These are things that AI cannot answer for us. They may give us an output, but we within ourselves have to really discover them. So to figure it out, we just need to think again. Thank you. Any thoughts? Inception. This is like Inception.
So, um, okay, we can agree that let's say setting aside AI, that working a 60-hour week is bad.
Mhm.
Okay, but if everybody else doing the same thing you're doing is working a 60-hour week, and you only work 40, you're going to fall behind and not be as successful as them. So, um, I, it seems like the same thing applies to using AI. Like you would say, well, because all the things with efficiency
Mhm.
and cognitive offloading.
Mhm.
So today, um, it's almost malpractice to not use
Correct. Right.
AI.
You're right.
Uh, but then that that solves today's problem, but not next year or next decade's problem.
Mhm.
So how do you balance that across time?
So if we look at from an apples to apples thing, when we say 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week, then the next question is each of those hours productive or unproductive?
Right.
And what's particularly interesting about this is that in dentistry, we a lot of dentists look at their productivity on a monthly basis, right? They say, "Oh, my production was X on the per month." But my answer, my when I that kind of question back is, how much? What was your production per hour?
Right.
Right. So the person who's doing 40 hours a week might actually be more productive than the person clocking 60 hours because there is a kind of a curve at which the productive drops off. Is that kind of what you're?
Well, yeah, but then um, I'm thinking more, the short term versus the long term, right? That in the short term, um, using, doing some vibe coding to
Mhm.
get the product out the door
Oh, okay.
is
Okay.
the right thing to do. But then you don't have the foundation,
Correct. Yeah.
and you won't be able to maintain it.
Yeah. Well, that's where this idea. Okay. So that's where this idea of you have to integrate both. That's why you have to have the solid foundation.
Right.
You allow it to get you 80% of the way there, where have to know the fundamentals and know what's coming out. It's the same thing when if you have a direct report, somebody who works underneath you and you're reviewing their work. If you don't know what they're doing, then at least the fundamentals.
Right.
Because you might not know the technical aspects of what the person is doing, but the fundamentals. So I think that's where it comes to depth. You have to really kind of pressure test the depth of the AI. The thing that I question is it continues to get deeper. It continues to get better. So even this idea of, pushback to myself is that in a way, the AI is wandering in its own way by pressure test, by thinking of these different paths all over the place. You know, um, is that a quote inefficiency in the system, or is it actually just thinking the way that humans have their own wander and their own creative side, but if you're doing it in a mechanical? So yeah, I think See, the other thing I think about is if the recipient doesn't know the difference between an AI output and a human made output, how much does it really matter? So when creatives would say, "Oh, this looks AI made," that's what they are. "Oh, this looks AI made." It's like, okay, you're a professional artist, you can tell that, but if 90% of the population cannot tell the difference, does it matter? You know, and it's interesting when you look throughout history of pushback from technologies and technology basically saying, "Oh, this is photography, for instance, isn't real art because it's just capturing something as opposed to making it yourself and interpreting." But ours is the eye of the beholder. So yeah.
Some of your argument is that efficiency in and of itself, actually, I don't know. To me, I'm thinking efficiency in and of itself, maybe this was the argument, is not actually going to be super beneficial because it doesn't have these sort of cognitive underpinnings, which make it really important.
Right.
So, yes, you can be more efficient, make the websites do the things, or let me just use an example I'm more familiar with. So, professors can be more efficient and do more research projects, right?
Mhm.
They get more publications out and have more students and have all the things that were measured on metric wise. But if we got rid of those metrics or we stopped caring about them, whichever the case may be, and we actually said, I'm going to ignore everything, and I'm definitely going to ignore my students and probably get fired, and I'm going to come up with a really brilliant idea that I'm going to just push
Mhm.
for a few months and really just dwell on and come up with something new. Like, actually, that might be,
Mhm.
I mean, again, might get fired in the meantime or something because of the constraints, but I'm thinking a little bit more like the Google model,
Mhm.
10% of your time to do whatever.
Mhm.
And we're also going to have a lot of places to chill out so you can talk with other people and
Mhm.
just, sort of like the tree outside your
Mhm.
basement, but instead of tree outside your basement, another brilliant person who's thinking of another idea and you happen to be in the weird new age modern colors or whatever.
Mhm.
Uh, as opposed to, like, I don't know. I always think of people who are like pushing efficiency ending up in a job where AI is going to take their job anyway. Like if it's a job where you're just, continually outsourcing and trying to get that 90-hour work week, or that 30 actual hours to be what 90 hours was 2 years ago.
Well, typically, when the more efficient you try to make a process, the more simple you make it, and the more likely, it's a stepwise thing.
Yeah.
Like all the
There's the
different,
struggle.
yeah, yeah. It's like the Six Sigma, which is like a project management certification in manufacturing. Just try to get it all perfect, and but that's what computers can do. But it is the meandering, right? That they can't. I think I mean, then it comes to the question of like, what is efficiency mean exactly? Faster product, does that have a higher value? Some people might say the faster you get the product out, the more value it has. But others would say, well, the deliberate you are, the more value it might bring. So the longer time is actually worth it. And I think that type of a question is going to come to a head. So this is always the thing is like my philosopher artist part of me hopes that humanity will realize this. For instance, you think of all of the garbage movies and that's, streaming TV shows that are out there. They're just not good, right? They're not thoughtful. They know the algorithm, they know what people click on, and that's what they're coming out with. Compared to the film the media that's actually good. So, but I think that unfortunately that majority of the population is going to go for the yeah, yeah, which then makes me think, well, where is that going to lead us? So,
Uh, so how much think about this cognitive struggle? Thinking that the reason we want to get around that is because it's stuff that we inherently care less about the cognitive struggle. So I guess what I'm thinking about is there a little bit of a compensation effect? Not that everyone will do that. So let's go back to the physical example, right? So say the population stops doing physical labor, and not everyone in that population starts exercising 8 hours a day the way they were doing physical labor. But an exercise and sports industry comes up because people really like that. They really enjoy that. And yes, some people, I run because it not because I like running, but it makes me feel good. And when I see Jonathan running down the street at full speed, I'm always like, oh, I wish I was a runner like that. But yeah, but I feel like some people do. And so here's my other thought of how people have done that. So I feel like you're right. People are not cognitively paying attention to like classic sort of work and academic things like they used to. But television shows and movies, not the junk ones, have gotten so much more complicated. People are putting a lot more cognitive effort into their entertainment, right? Sorry, I don't know why my voice is going. Of course, like it's almost a compensation there. And then likewise, there's this weird but apparently very successful, meme influencer social media things where people are spending all this time, remixing things and commenting on things other people have done. So it's almost like there's a lot of displaced effort that's going into different sort of things. I mean, maybe more entertainment things. And I don't know, if again, not everyone's doing that, but I wonder if there's some analogies there that people are then shift those away. So I don't know. That I was rambling thoughts. I don't.
No, for sure. I think that's a super good point. I mean, a subset of the population, like those who get into fitness and, they just see, okay, we're going to do fitness and nutrition when it goes after. So when I think of from the physical analogy, you're going to have some really hyper fit people, and then you're going to have not fit, right? And I think from the cognitive perspective, and I hear this from parents, in particular, when they bring this concept up and they worry about their kids and they go, okay, I want to make sure my kid is learning with blocks and things and not just watching a YouTube video. But I do think that there are because it's natural to want to think deeply. So people are going to want to find a way to do that. Maybe, maybe that's the way they do it. I guess one of the things I would think about is from the electronic piece, I wonder what the neuroplasticity would look like between someone who is fast producing with these electronic means, say the memes or the audio, and they're remixing and they're doing all these things because you're producing super, super, super fast. Whereas someone who has to actually grind with the clay. I don't know. I'm just posing the question. I wonder if there would be a difference there. Because it's that idea of passive where you're getting the dopamine hits, the excitement of something coming right away. Yeah. Sorry.
I guess if AI is listening, I'll go ahead and come out and just say, I have no qualms about just saying we should say no. I think for the reasons we discussed, I think my biggest pushback, what I might rest most firmly on why we should be slamming the brakes, getting off the train is that is not a morally neutral thing. There's like no traceability. There's stuff happening in that area of explainable AI and stuff, and still, I'm just haven't been sold yet. And the more I've observed the developments, I've come to all of these, and the more I see, the more convinced I am. And maybe if the hallucination rate's dropping, still not convinced because that, however small that gets, I'm still 100% certain there is something wrong somewhere. I'm an engineer, and 100% reliability is impossible.
Right.
But AI has 100% reliability of something off in it. So no matter how good it gets, like so far in the ick factor camp that
Yeah.
I'm never gonna be on the AI train.
I love that you brought that up. I think that's really, really valid. I mean, I think the reason why I don't even bring that up as like a pump the brake, like stop immediately, is because industry, it's already the cat's out of
You're
the bag.
crazy. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not necessarily that you're crazy, but more that, I mean, Elon Musk talked about this he's like, put the pump for years, pump the brakes, stop. We have to be really thoughtful. We have to be really thoughtful. We have to really, really thoughtful. And then GPT comes out. Yeah. And he goes, well, yeah, well, I guess it's going. So I'm going to make XAI and we'll hope for the best.
Yeah.
So
I'm in the, how do I get my life analog now?
Yeah.
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 And I'm not on pen and paper yet. I have trouble going to that for things, but cell phone, like I have a light phone. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I wanted to get one.
It's exactly what you know what you're getting. I mean, I still think maybe I should get rid of this too, right?
Yeah.
But so them's my thoughts. Now everybody knows.
Yeah.
You can report me to my department chair.
What's funny is that Gemini, so I've had Gemini review my note presentation before, it does grammatical things, citations, et cetera, et cetera. It goes, would you like me to give you questions that engineering professors are likely to ask you? And I was like, sure. So it did. And you know what's crazy is that both your questions are on that list at the top. Isn't that wild? Your question, what was it? Maybe they was being hopeful in itself. Yeah. Like maybe they won't turn me on. Yeah, I think I'm both excited and terrified. I mean, that's the thing, that the real thing is going to change every industry, but people don't know where it's going to go. And yeah, I'm worried about the Temu population, the Sheen population, where they're just seeing all of the stuff that they can just buy and get soon, all of this. And just the way that social media and Facebook is optimized for us to stay on it. They're optimizing the GPTs to do the same thing. And they're going to be X more powerful.
Insight, slam grace.
Yeah.
So let me add two more things to
Yeah.
the startup here. So at the beginning, you mentioned that, the very beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that business, but we didn't talk about any of the incentives that companies have to promote their different,
Yes.
and their claims for either hyperproductivity or the capabilities of the airline. So, I mean, I sometimes always think that of course, it's a subscription service. Of course, it is in their incentive to hide what they can do now and what they will be able to do in the next month as much as possible.
Yes.
And they are not. It is against their, and they are in competition, so it is against their
ethos
to be realistic about it.
Yeah.
They have to exaggerate.
Yes. Okay.
However, there is one in particular that I find the most annoying of all four of them, and that's growth.
Yeah, of course.
In my opinion, so more than one time, I have had a student come to me telling me that my answer to a particular question is wrong because generally said so. And I have to show them, they missed this part. Okay. And I found many students that do not have the idea that these entities can be wrong. So they have lost one thing that I have seen in my students, that they have lost an idea that they should also critically think what the answer that they're getting. One of these LLMs in particular is very good at saying things based on the opinions of the owner. And that's Grok. Okay, and Grok has been caught multiple times saying really, really crazy things.
Yes.
Okay. Like just a few months ago, at the end of the last semester, Grok was up saying that you put Mike Tyson and Elon Musk in the ring. Elon Musk will win.
yeah.
You know, and Mike Tyson, sorry, and Elon Musk and Mike Johnson in the 100-meter dash, and it's still Elon Musk will win. You know, so one of them is not really about productivity or about intelligence.
Yeah.
And that's the one that we know.
Mm.
How much of that goes into Anthropic and
Yeah,
GPT
100%.
and into Copilot. If you ask DeepSeek anything about the Chinese Communist Party in certain periods of time, it will tell you nothing happened. Okay, you know, the Great Leap Forward was a great success according to DeepSeek.
Yes.
And so it's not only about performance in a particular task here. There's more going on. There's more incentives than just
100. Like Jeremiah said, it's not morally neutral.
yes.
Yeah.
Facebook.
Yeah, I think this is a super point. I mean, you know, and that is like for a whole nother sometime, right? But I totally agree. This is like the whole question that's coming up with Claude right now in the you know, Department of Defense, right? Why Anthropic said, or rather they cut off Anthropic, because Anthropic says we don't want our programs to be used for autonomous weapons. And what was it? But kill orders essentially, right? But they said, well, this is against our policy or our mission. And you know, on one hand, I go, okay, yeah, you know, I get that. But you guys have heard of Lucky Palmer? Lucky Palmer? He is the founder of Oculus, who was bought by Meta, and now he has a company called Anduril that is a defense weapons company. And his mission is basically he's a billionaire, he doesn't need to do it, but he's basically like Tony Stark. His mission is to make, you know, weapons affordable, et cetera, for the U.S. government, for all of us taxpayers, basically. But his point was like, we should never allow private companies to dictate country policy or weapons policy or, you know, defense. And his point basically saying Anthropic was in the wrong. And what's interesting about that argument is because he goes, we should allow our elected leaders to do that, not people whose incentives structure is around finance, right? Or putting their own morality into it, right? What we hope for as citizens is that our morality of those we vote for is reflected in the people who are elected, which is not always the case. But I think that is like such a central. We're living in a central questions era, where these are very, very important. They are going to change society. I mean, I'm not comfortable with a computer program being head of autonomous weapons, or choosing who dies and doesn't. You know,
Like that position opens the discussion of who has the real power in America. Is it the elected officials? Is it unelected bureaucrats, or is it tech billionaires? Right?
Yeah.
And how you answer that question will determine whether Anthropic is in the right.
Yeah, 100%.
Coming back to what we can actually do something about. So, like you mentioned, photography versus master.
Yeah.
So I read a blog where he said, you know, he thought that when everybody had cameras in their pockets, that the art of photography would go away, and it doesn't. Right? Because you can tell the difference between pictures that are taken by real photographers and pictures that I take. Right? And that's kind of one of those closing questions you have is, you know, right? And I think the challenge to me is to figure out what in my discipline is like photography and what is like a camera. Right? Where AI is the camera, and okay, yeah, you can have the AI, but if you don't have the understanding, then you won't make something that is beautiful or appropriate or whatever. Right? And trying to figure that out, and then teaching students the things that make them make the human valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. I think that's where a lot of these, when you think of educate, because I did so much school, you know what I mean? And I've seen it from, as I was growing up, but also seeing it as an adult. I started dental school when I was 30. So going through the education system again, but with a different lens. I commend you because I think very few educators are willing to even try to tackle that question. Really. I mean, one of my motivations in wanting to publicly speak on this is for people to just try to really think about this deliberately. Because I do think it is, when you look at the social media comparison, people are just consuming, not thinking about it. Give the kid the iPad, they just watch it, right? Well, I think that's a tough question. You can start with the prompt.
Yeah.
Start with the prompt first, but particularly with things that are, I think, science based. If you think of the quote that says it's no longer being able just to produce a fact, it's about synthesizing critical information. So I think back on all the exams that I take that are biologic exams for things that I will never encounter in a dental chair. Literally doesn't matter. And the more facts that are being made, the more lecture slides that are being put in, and more information that I will never use. And I think that people have to really rethink the way that we learn and come back to that exact question. What is it in this discipline that you just need to know? And it's part of the beauty, the art of it, so that you can mold. It's almost like if you think of maybe information as becoming a unsculpted block of mud. And what you're trying to do is teach the people how to carve it, what to select out for, what to select in, and you're learning as you go. But you're never going to know everything that's in that one. That's right. It's like the amount of times I've tried to learn, like force myself to learn how to do Python. And it's always comes down to hello world. And I go, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? And then you keep going to the next thing, the next thing, the next. And there's a very, just throw that out is that even necessary with live coding?
Right.
No, I don't think it is. Like as a non-practitioner, where it can get you from 0 to 1 with apps, it probably does not make sense to know it under the hood. But then to everyone's point here, if you don't know what's under the hood, then how do you know that there's no security vulnerabilities? But that's where it says, is it irresponsible to look through every single line of code? Because the amount of time it would take versus the product you can get, and you can start beta testing and start iterating. Boom. I think that's a fair question. I mean, plenty of tech people out in the valley are basically saying within X amount of years, no code will be human. So, yeah.
I think the opposite of facts, I feel like you're saying, figure out how does what we might call applied practical experience. That's a little different, right? Because you're saying, about coding security vulnerabilities. I'm thinking, if I'm coding a website for your business, who cares about security vulnerabilities? And who cares if you know all the stuff about business? What you need to know is really, you need to be able to sense what the business need is and know the customer base and figure out how to get there. And that is definitely a form.
Yeah.
And definitely not a set of facts, but it's also maybe not I think of people that run successful businesses, I don't think that they necessarily have a deep knowledge of business management theory.
Right.
I'm thinking of a program that I teach into as well, where we're training applied psychologists in workplace, and how even in the master's level classes and stuff, we're not talking about theory much. We're talking about, okay, theory parameterizes it, and then we say, okay, how does this play out on your teams? How does this play out when you have a person that's doing this? How does this look like? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think it's a super good. I mean, super good point. It's almost maybe that's where you start when you reflect on what's the beauty in what you're doing. The human part of it is saying, okay, in the world, what does it actually look like when it's applied? The business example, I think, is easier because it's a very physical and relational type of thing, whereas the engineering and computer piece is still in a box and it's still a program and it's still built by ones and zeros. So I think that's it. It makes it harder. I think it makes it a lot harder. Because then I guess you can say, what is the applied version of that in the real world? And you might say, well, maybe it's running a scrum, but that's relational. But you're going to need scrums when you're vibe coding everything. You're getting through your sprints in an hour as opposed to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then
Engineering projects are more parameterized to begin with.
correct.
Like,
Yeah. And within that, because they're more parameterized, they're more likely to be taken by a computer.
it's a little bit different.
Yeah, one thing I've heard from I went to an industry panel one. It said AI is not really infiltrating systems engineering, which is less how to do it and more what should be done.
Mm,
Right.
yes. Yes. That totally makes sense. Well, because that's a much softer version.
Yeah.
Right. That because you're again synthesizing a lot of environmental factors or relational factors, depending on what you mean by systems engineering.
Right.
That's interesting.
It was kind of like
The judgment. There's a lot of judgment there.
right. Like you gave the example of the partition that
Mm-hmm.
they redesigned. Well, but that partition is part of a large